everyone, and welcome back to the Remembering Project, where we gather the scattered pieces of who we are and invite them home, one breath, one story, one sacred yes at a time. I'm your host, Martina, and I'm so honored to walk this path with you. We're in our July series of Radiance and Inner Fire, and today's episode is for anyone who has ever swallowed their rage in the name of love. For anyone who's been told to be strong, be grateful, or just move on when their insides burned. Today, we're speaking about anger. Not the kind that destroys recklessly, but the kind that defends what is holy, the kind that says, enough, the kind that awakens, protects, moves us to action, and purifies. It's the kind of anger that belongs to a really fascinating and empowering Egyptian goddess that we're going to be talking about in a moment. She is the face of sacred fire, fierce love, justice wrapped in flame, something I think we could definitely use in our culture right now at this time in history. A reminder of the kind of inner fire that burns away what is no longer needed, leaving only what is real and necessary to begin again once we have emerged from the ashes. But first, because we're all busy, we all get consumed with stuff that's going on in our lives. I'd love it if you would join me in taking a little bit of a pause and just shelving all of that stuff that you have to deal with later to just be present and to take a moment to arrive and ground. If you're in a place where you can do it safely, right, meaning not driving a car, maybe you might like to take a moment to place a hand on your heart and one on your belly and take a deep breath in and another deep breath out and just let the tensions of your daily life go away. You can get back to them later if you want to, but for now, let's just be together. And I'd love for you to ask yourself, where has my fire gone, ignored, or misunderstood? What unspoken truth has been burning inside me, waiting to be honored? You know, there's a kind of fire that the caregivers and helpers in this world know too well. It's a fire of exhaustion, sometimes heartbreak, sometimes helplessness, and yes, anger. And we don't talk about that enough. We don't talk about anger, especially women's anger, right? Where so often we have, especially if we're of a certain generation, have been raised to be quiet, not rock the boat, be pleasant, all of those things that little girls are told make them grow up to be nice women instead of maybe being kind and compassionate women who stand up for themselves and others. But we're told to sweep our anger away. And because of that, we don't want to seem ungrateful. We're told that love is quiet and grief is gentle. And sometimes we're really afraid of what might pour out if we let the dam break. I remember those days of caring with every ounce of my being, spending every ounce of my energy on taking care of my mom. But at the same time as I was doing that, and at the same time as people thought I maybe had things together, there was something inside me that was just screaming silently. I didn't want to feel angry. I didn't want to feel angry at them. I definitely didn't want to feel angry at my mom, even though as much as I loved her and as much as she loved me, there were times when the behaviors associated with her frontotemporal lobe dementia could be really challenging. And when you're dealing with that, you're kind of holding this duality or polarity of, man, she just said something really horrible, or she kicked at me or pulled my hair and it hurt. And it's not really her. Like if she were her normal self, she wouldn't do this. But just because you understand it doesn't mean that you don't get hurt or you don't get mad. Sometimes you're struggling with still feeling kind of angry after they've forgotten what happened and are back to being their normal, pleasant self again because whatever was misfiring in their brain has gotten back on track again, even if it's just, momentarily. So when I was experiencing those things, I would tell myself, be good, be strong, be patient. Don't make this about you. But my soul knew better, right? There was a roar inside of me, and that roar wasn't a betrayal of love. It had nothing to do with whether I loved my mom or not, or even whether I loved her enough to put her before my own needs. What it really was love demanding that I include myself and take care of myself. So often when something, I don't know if you're like me, I tend to be a person who I don't get mad very easily. If someone is doing something that frustrates me, I try really hard to see things from their perspective. And I will do a lot of rationalizing and justifying on their behalf many times over when they do things that I don't like or that they upset me, because I'm trying to always come from the viewpoint of, what their experience is and how they feel, and I want to talk things out, and it's endlessly frustrating to me when people don't want to talk about it. But that is a totally different episode about anger and boundaries. But my point is that it takes me a long time before I will finally lash out in anger. Like, finally, the dam breaks and I will say something or say something sharply. And I really do believe that when those things happen, that's, as weird as it sounds, it's a kind of love. It's love for yourself. It's love saying, hey, this is really uncomfortable for me. This is making me upset, and I'm not saying anything about it. I'm not letting this person know how I feel, or maybe they don't care how I feel. I don't know. Depends on the person and the situation, right? But it really is a kind of love demanding that you include yourself and that you look out for yourself and your own happiness and safety and emotional regulation and all of those good things, right? So, anger, we're often told that anger is something bad, something we need to control. And of course, we don't want to get to the point where we have like an anger problem and we're completely filled with bitterness and rage. But anger is also a compass, right? We don't get mad about things that we don't care about. We don't get mad if we're not in situations where our emotions and our feelings of security and safety are not somehow being compromised, right? Or even someone else's feelings of security and safety are being compromised. We can be angry about things, kind of on other people's behalf that maybe don't affect us personally, other than that we live in this great big web of life where a ripple in one part affects every other part of it. But anger is a sign that there is something wrong, right? So it's not always bad. And it's definitely also a stage of grief. And the thing about caregiving, long term caregiving with something like dementia, is that often we're experiencing this state of grief for a really long time. I don't know if you've heard of something called anticipatory grief, but it feels just as real as the actual, when you're going through a loved one who is slowly losing executive function, physical function, the mental capacity to do things for themselves, the capacity to emotionally regulate. There's a kind of grief that comes along with that because it's a loss, right? I mean, we call it anticipatory grief, like it's for something that hasn't happened yet. But the truth is that it's happening. The dying and the loss when you're dealing with dementia are things that are happening over time, sometimes over a really long period of time. So we live in this kind of liminal in between state of grief at the little deaths that are occurring every day while we wait for what the big death that we know is coming, right? So grief is not something that only comes after caregiving ends. It's something that really lives inside it and is kind of inextricably intertwined in the slow losses, the forgotten moments, the watching someone you love fade away bit by bit, watching them behave in ways that aren't part of their personality, right? And with that kind of grief, there's anger that comes with it, right? And not just at fate or death, though we're often angry with them too, but it also really manifests itself. And this is not just me speaking from my own experience, though it certainly was my experience. It's me speaking for the by now hundreds of people I've talked to and been in caregiver groups and grief groups with, who are angry at all the ways that they were left alone in it, right? So often, again, it tends, I mean, and not to diminish that men have their, men experience grief and loss and anger and all of those things just as profoundly as we do. But there is a reality that women are often the ones who are left to be the caregiver when somebody gets sick, right? If there are two siblings, like 9 out of 10 times, it's going to be the sister who ends up burdened with taking care of the parents and not the brother. I'm not saying it never happens otherwise, but it's pretty common, right? The ratios and of male to female caregivers in those sorts of situations tend to sway toward female. And regardless, though, of gender, so often as caregivers, we put our own lives on hold, whether it's, our careers, our dreams, things we want to do, all of those things get kind of put on the back burner. So there's a grief in that and an anger sometimes that goes with that at the unfairness of it. But there's also anger at the people who didn't show up, at the broken systems that failed us, even at the words spoken in confusion by the person we loved, right? Even if that's not them speaking, those words still manage to wound, even when we tell ourselves every time it's not them, it's the dementia. And that's a lot to carry, right? And it's a lot to carry long term. Understanding something doesn't mean it doesn't have a profound impact on our emotions. Or, I know for me, often the case was if my mom said something that made me want to cry or that made me angry, I would try to pack it away because I didn't want to be unfair to her, or I didn't want her to see me cry and then get upset because I knew she probably would. And there's a stress of that attrition where you just keep on packing that stuff back into your little suitcase of emotional dysregulation that you never deal with. And it eventually comes out. It might not be while your loved one's still alive, but it will come out. And it comes out in different ways, right? It can come out as anger or rage. It can come out as illness, but it definitely will come out. But back to anger specifically, anger is not a detour from grief. It's interwoven into it. And it's definitely something that is part of the road, which is why I really want to talk today about an Egyptian goddess called Sekhmet, who is the guardian of sacred fire. And so in ancient Egypt, she was the one who really understood this kind of fire. Sekhmet is, when you see depictions of her, lion-headed and solar-born, which is so fitting as we are moving into Leo season. And Sekhmet was both a destroyer and healer goddess, right? And that's not uncommon, right? We have goddesses like Kali in the Hindu. I lost the word Hindu from my mind for a moment. In the Hindu pantheon, who have that kind of function, and that happens so often in earth-based spiritual paths anyway, where endings are new beginnings. The destroyer is also the healer. We have to clear the way to make way for the new. So those two kind of polarities tend to go hand in hand, and Sekhmet is no exception to this. There's a story about her that once humanity turned away from the principle of Ma'at, which is the principle of balance and truth within ancient Egyptian spirituality. And so Sekhmet was sent to restore the divine order. and she swept through the land like wildfire. She was fierce and unstoppable, but her rage kept growing until it consumed everything. And the other gods, were starting to get a little worried about Sekhmet, that she would completely lose control and go too far. So to stop her, they tricked her with a lake of red dyed beer. And in her rage, thinking it was blood, she drank from it and became intoxicated, and in fact drank so much that she became so intoxicated that she fell into a deep sleep. And while she was resting, something really interesting happened. And that is that when she awoke, as so often happens to us when our anger has run its course, she didn't have a lot of energy and rage left in her, and she was softened, right? Her rage had kind of burned through her. And from then on, she was not only a goddess of destruction, but also one of healing, medicine, and restoration, because her sacred fire had done its work. Sekhmet teaches us that anger, when honored and guided, becomes a force, a holy force for protection and I almost said transportation. It is not a force for transportation. However, it is a force for transformation. And as such, it's actually not something to be feared or suppressed, but something we can learn from. And some people will tell you, well, you can't be angry and love, right? And love is a soft and fluffy thing. It makes you feel squishy and good, and love is gentle and love is kind. But as Julia Butterfly Hill, although I don't think she uses the butterfly anymore, I could be wrong about this. She's an activist who once said that sometimes love actually has edges and teeth, right? And I love that expression, because the truth is that while we kind of try to shy away from anger as something that's somehow, unholy, or the realm of people who have no self-control, and obviously it's not a great thing if you can't control it, or if you let it go too far. But at the same time, measured anger channeled to do the work of love is also one of the most powerful and motivating forces in the universe. And it's not something that we should underestimate. So to walk with Sekhmet is to carry that knowledge deep in your bones, and to be able to say confidently, my anger is not forbidden. It's not a failure. It's a compass. It's sacred, and it's mine, right? Your anchor is yours, and you can and should use it if you can do so to make things better. Because ultimately, I mean, isn't that why we're all here in the end anyway? We get confused and think being here is about stuff or about accomplishments, and those things all feel great. But at the end of the day, isn't it to have made some kind of a mark, to have made things better? And, if you're someone who is a caregiver, you've already made things so much better for someone who really needed you and wouldn't have been able to function otherwise or survive otherwise. So now that we've talked about that, and we understand that anger is not just some negative, uncontrolled thing, I want to shift a little bit to talking about the faces of caregiver anger, because there are a lot of them. So let's name them. Number one is the anger at those who didn't show up. For every caregiver I have ever talked to, including myself, there are people who they feel left them in the lurch, right? Friends who stopped calling when they couldn't do fun stuff anymore, people who just kind of disappeared because it was awkward, and they didn't know how to address that you were caring for someone who's going to die, or family, right? Family who promised to help or didn't promise to, right? People who promised to help and didn't follow through, but seemed to have endless advice. Family who never promised to help and just didn't show up or stopped showing up. And then there are those who and accept that everything is just going to go back to being normal again. And that's not always possible. We're told to let it go, but it's hard, right? We hold on to that stuff because we feel betrayed, and it's not bitterness. It's actual honest heartbreak. And restoring relationships, if possible, takes time because the trust has been broken. And the worst part is that it happened while you were breaking, sometimes while no one else noticed. Now, the second kind of anger we've talked about a little bit already, which is anger at the person you're caring for. And that can be a really tough one because that kind of anger can come with a lot of guilt because we feel like we shouldn't be angry at them. I mean, not everyone does. I know I've talked to people who have unreasonable expectations sometimes of their loved one, which is another problem, right? We can't hold people responsible for behaviors that they have no control over. But even when we know that, and even when we understand that they didn't mean it, words are still weapons. They can wound you. Our bodies still hold on to the trauma of that moment. They still hold on to the flinch. We can love deeply and still feel hurt, right? I'm sure there are plenty of people you love who don't have dementia and who don't need caregiving. And sometimes you get up each other's noses and you get mad, and it's normal. But when it happens with someone we're caring for, there can just be a lot of guilt and a lot of feelings associated with it. But you have to know that it isn't disloyal, right? It's just human to react. And it's human to react when we've been sort of suppressing our feelings as well. And the third kind of anger is anger at ourselves, right? I know so many people who've been caregivers and given up everything and still feel guilt that they weren't patient enough, or guilt that there were times when they just wished it would be over, right? Not just for themselves, but just because they're so tired and haven't had a break, and because they don't want their loved one to suffer anymore. Anger at breaking down, right? I mentioned before that I often would try to hide my feelings, especially if it was, just thinking about my mom and how much I loved her and how much I didn't want her to see me cry in front of her because I knew I was going to lose her and I didn't want her to hurt, or when she'd ask me if there was medicine for what she had and if it was going to get better. I mean, that was so heartbreaking, right? And most of the time when she asked me that, I would just lie. There's a thing called therapeutic lying where you start to weigh, is telling this person the truth going to enhance their quality of life or just needlessly upset them? If it comforted her to think that, a pill was just taking time to work and things were going to be better one day, why not? Right? And again, even though it's so often misplaced, anger at ourselves is natural because no one is born knowing how to do all of the things they need to do to be a caregiver, yet somehow we're thrown into it, right? Whether we have the help of a facility where our loved one is living or whether we're doing it at home. None of us was born how to navigate this shitty, I mean, to be really blunt, shitty healthcare system that we have, or to know what to do or how to respond to all of the needs that our loved ones have, right? Most of us learn this stuff on the fly. For most people, we were not nurses before we became caregivers, or we were not doctors, and suddenly we have this job where we're caregiver, medicine dispenser, chauffeur, power of attorney, cruise director, arranging activities for them if they're still well enough to get around, buying all the groceries, doing all the cleaning, all the cooking, all the things. It's a lot, especially to navigate while you're navigating your own grief and all of the things that go with it. And we're not built to carry all of that alone, and we weren't meant to. Yet we're still really hard on ourselves when we don't do it perfectly. And then the last place I want to talk about is the anger we sometimes feel at the system, right? There are some good care facilities and paid caregivers out there who are great. And there are also just as many that don't listen and don't do what they need to protect people. Some of the violations that these places perpetrate and yet are still allowed to stay running and make a profit are just abhorrent. And it's, if you've ever seen a report of some of the things that happen at them, it is really hard to wrap your mind around the fact that some of them are allowed to stay open and keep tending to patients. And, even when people mean well, there still are medical staff who are undertrained, who don't, especially with dementia, who don't understand. They know Alzheimer's a bit, but they don't understand really the differences between that and the many other types of dementia that are out there. So, especially with the rarer ones, they're often misdiagnosed, or they don't know how to talk to someone or treat them in a way that makes them part of conversations and doesn't diminish them, and also recognizes that they don't understand everything and they're not going to. And at the same time, there are medical staff who are overworked and unequipped and want to do well, but they're not given the time or the tools to do it. And there's definitely anger at the social systems that let caregivers fall through the cracks emotionally, financially, physically. There is so much that goes into caregiving, and there's so little real support out there for them. There are lots of organizations, but many of them, especially some of the bigger ones, a lot of what they do is just, once you're on their radar, is sending you requests for donations, which isn't really helpful in the moment when you're struggling. And that can create a lot of anger at the people who say they're there to help you and don't, right? And all of these types of anger are pretty natural. So don't let anyone gaslight you into thinking that you're wrong for feeling it. There's nothing wrong with you for feeling anger, even rage if the transgression is big enough. There's something wrong with the system that calls your anger unreasonable and doesn't throw you a lifeline while you're drowning. But what if our anger isn't a threat to our compassion, but a part of it? What if it's not a weakness? What if it's our humanity crying out for justice? Sekhmet's fire isn't just chaos, it's clarity. Anger can be holy. Anger can tell the truth. And anger can light the path back to dignity for you and even for your loved one. If you've been listening for a few episodes now, you might have noticed that I don't want to just talk at you and give you information, but I like to give you tools that you can use in each episode. And with that in mind, I want to give you a few ways that you can befriend your inner lioness, your inner Sekhmet, right? So the first thing is to do what's called lion's breath breathing. And when you do that, you inhale deeply through your nose and exhale with a roar with your tongue out and your jaws open. And I'm going to tell you right now that I've tried it before and it can feel pretty silly. You can look up lion's breath on YouTube if you want to see a demonstration of how to do it. But sometimes sound really will move what words can't. So if it's something that feels aligned to you to try it out. You don't have to ever do it again if you hate it, but maybe it'll help. The second thing is to move your body, right? Rage dance. Yeah, I said rage dance. I know it sounds a little silly, but really put on a beat that makes your bones move and stomp and sway and shake. Shake out the anger and the stress from your body. Let it roar. Let the tension leave your muscles as movement becomes medicine. Again, it might feel silly to do, but think about animals in the wild. They instinctively shake after a traumatic experience, and it's their way of resetting their nervous system. It discharges energy and helps them return back to a calm state. And as much as we don't want to think we're animals too. And we carry traumas in our body as well. And so this is a kind of natural wisdom that you can reclaim, this idea of shaking it out. Another thing that I find really therapeutic is writing. I have so many journals from about the time I was 10 years old to now. And one of the ways that I have always used them is to write down the things that I didn't feel I could say out loud, or the things that I didn't feel like I could talk to other people about, right? I write about other things too, but it really is a place where I use the pages to process my feelings and my anger and to investigate and look deeper into things that are, that are causing a little bit of chaos in my world. And it really is a wonderful and safe way to get out our feelings. And the beautiful thing about that is you can just write it to figure things out. You can also write a letter to someone you're angry at, even if it's the universe, and you just want to write down the things that you weren't allowed to say. And you can combine that act of writing it down with a little bit of magic and take that paper when you're done and burn it in a safe container and let the fire, especially it's great if you can do this after the full moon, in that time between the full and the new moon, when the energy of the moon is waning, magically speaking. It's the time when we use that energy to release and heal. And even if you don't believe that it helps you release and heal, just the act of burning it is, if nothing else, is symbolic and can feel really good. And it's a way of releasing those feelings into the universe so you don't have to keep carrying them and can move on to channeling whatever anger you're feeling in productive ways. Another thing that you can do to remind yourself that your anger is okay is just to create a little altar space. You can make a Sekhmet altar, or just an altar to your emotions, and that it's okay to be angry and to feel what you feel. If you want to channel specifically, though, to your anger or to Sekhmet or some other goddess that helps us process rage, you might want to put some things like a red candle on your little altar space, right? And another thing is, altar sounds really formal and like it has to be some big fancy thing, but I'm talking about like a space on the top of a bookshelf or table or wherever you want it, a little corner of your desk that could have a little candle, maybe a lioness image, maybe a crystal that helps process anger. Any of the red crystals work for that. You could thinking about the idea of ma'at and the soul being measured against the weight of a feather in Egyptian cosmology. You could add a feather for truth and for justice. Keep it as a space to remind you that your fierce love is welcome. And then along kind of with the letter writing is you can just do some journaling and meditation. And so I've put together a couple of prompts for you, which include: who didn't show up for you? And what do you need to say? Even if it's only to yourself and you never speak it aloud to them, right? Sometimes it can help to take the energy and what you learn from writing about it and have a conversation with them if you have a relationship that's worth putting the energy of saving it into. And sometimes it's good just to get clear on what happened, how you feel about it, and move on, right? We don't have to stay stuck in the energy of the people who didn't show up for us. We have sovereignty and we can decide what kind of relationships we want. And if people can't give us that, we're also free to move on and make space for new ones that are more nurturing. Another question you might want to ask yourself is, what part of me was silenced in caregiving? What does she need now? And then the other thing is, again, kind of getting back to the idea of somatics, and that we carry the energy of experiences in our bodies, especially when they're experiences or feelings that we've kind of suppressed in order to be able to function. You might want to ask yourself, where in my body do I still carry anger or rage that never had a witness, right? And as you do these things, Know that your anger is sacred. As I said, it's a compass. Your anger tells the truth of how you feel. You can BS yourself and other people into thinking it wasn't that bad or making excuses, but there's truth in anger. And it's a good idea to pay attention to it and what it's pointing to, right? And you don't have to, there's that expression of forgive and forget. You can forgive without forgetting. You can forgive without staying in situations that hurt you, right? Moving on doesn't necessarily mean that we haven't forgiven someone, doesn't mean that we wish them ill. It just means that we care about ourselves enough to remove ourselves if we're in a relationship or situation that's not nurturing for us. And the other thing that I really want to stress, again, just because so many of us women, especially, have grown up being told that we shouldn't get angry, right? We should be nice. And that is that your roar, no matter what you've been told, your roar is not too much, and neither are you. Your roar is medicine. Your anger is medicine. It points to where you need healing. It points to where there's something wrong that can't be sustained anymore, right? And in carrying that energy and fire of Sekhmet, right, we carry the energy of all of the different goddess archetypes in us. In carrying that fire, we're invited to protect what is holy, including ourselves, right? You deserve protection and are worthy of it. And so as we wind down and come to the end of this episode, I just want to say to the sacred fire that lives within you, may you be seen, may you be honored, may you be trusted. To Sekhmet, guardian of the flame, thank you for reminding us that rage can purify, rage can burn, that truth can roar. Beloved, may your fire never be silenced again. May your sacred yes include your no. And may your grief and your love both find space to breathe. Until next time, keep remembering, keep burning true, keep loving fiercely. If this episode moved you, please follow, like, and share the Remembering Project. Your support helps the sacred work reach those who need it. You can also tag me at Martina Rutledge on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, or Blue Sky. And I'm so grateful for you. Never forget that the world is a better place with you in it. Let's keep the fire burning together.